Now, please welcome Shawn Covell from our valued sponsor, Lam Research. Shawn is the head of ESG strategy and global leadership, and she will introduce our fireside chat this morning. Shawn?
Thank you, Camille, and thank you, Secretary Granholm, and good morning to all of our guests. I'm pleased to be with you today, and Lam is honored to sponsor the 6th Annual Diversity and Technology Symposium on Advancing Climate Resilience. As a global supplier of innovative wafer fabrication equipment and services to the semiconductor industry, our technology is at the core of the world's most exciting innovations. As we help transform the world with technology, we aspire to incorporate environmental, social, and governance principles into everything we do. From our global operations to our workplace practices, to how we source our materials and design our products, we act with purpose for a better world. And I can't think of a more important topic for this symposium than advancing climate resilience. Science tells us that we need to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. And we know this is the decade to deliver. With that in mind, last year, Lam announced our intention to operate on 100% renewable energy by 2030 and to be net zero by 2050. Because Lam knows we all need to be part of the solution. And as individuals and the public and private sectors work to reduce their carbon footprints, technology will play an increasingly important role in accelerating innovation in the climate space. From carbon capture technology to climate repair technology that would help clouds reflect more radiation to sustainable fuels, technology will power climate breakthroughs. And there are no two better people to discuss the role of technology in addressing climate change than our next speakers. With that, I am pleased to introduce the Fireside Chat on Advancing Climate Resilience with Natasha Stavros, PhD, Director of the Earth Lab Analytics Hub at the University of Colorado Boulder, and the Dean of the College of Engineering at UC Berkeley, Tsu-Jae King Liu. Tsu-Jae King Liu is internationally recognized for her impactful innovations in semiconductor technology and is highly regarded for her achievements as an instructor, mentor, and administrator. Her technical contributions have enabled the industry to continually improve the performance of leading-edge microchips. Natasha Stavros specializes in complex systems science, data science, image processing, and information technologies. She developed these skills as a fire ecologist, but has applied them in other complex systems, including NASA flight projects, biodiversity science, and urban ecology. She's an engaging public speaker and has participated in TEDx, giving a talk about uncertainty under decision-making and the role that's playing in our response to climate change and natural disasters. Welcome, ladies. We're very excited to hear from you today.
Thank you so much, Shawn, for that kind introduction. And good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Edge in Tech Symposium. And I'd like to thank Natasha here for spending time with us to chat and to provide us with actionable insights for advancing climate resilience. So good morning, Natasha. I thought maybe it would be great to have you share with us first how your interests and career path led you to focus on climate work.
Sure. Yeah, I had a very twisty, turny journey. I've never really known exactly what I wanted to do. Just that I wanted everything I did to be actionable and supportive of something good. I started with a math and computer science background because I really truly believe math is the most universal language. And from that, I did computer science, recognizing, big data and the age of big data. And I was working in solar physics and thought I can't do anything with that on Earth. So I did a master's in environmental sustainability and realized I needed some more domain expertise. So I did a PhD in quantitative forest ecology with an emphasis on megafires and climate change. And from there, I found NASA and they invited me to come and use some of their novel data sets, which were completely unusable for the level of science that I was doing. And so I had to learn remote sensing, and through that, I learned about information technologies and system engineering. So I've really had sort of a twisty path, and kind of say that I'm a Jane of all trades with interest in everything, and follow that and follow my heart in what I want to do, and create my own career.
That's fantastic. Well, it seems like this, you closed the loop because you came back to information technology, starting out with in math and computing. So that's not, yeah, I think you gain a lot of knowledge and expertise along the way to enable you to accomplish all that you're doing today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I talked with at one point had a bit of a life crisis, where's my identity? And I talked with a life coach, and she said, well, what are the core building blocks that make you feel fulfilled? And there's many ways that you can assemble those building blocks. If you just think really simply about two Lego pieces, you can arrange those two Lego pieces a million different ways, 10 different ways actually through combinatorics. And if you have 3 of them, you can arrange it 1,000 different ways. And if you have 6 of them, you can arrange it 915 million different ways. So the opportunities are boundless, even using the same fundamental building blocks along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. So why do you think, maybe can you share with us your thoughts on why this topic of advancing climate resilience is important and urgent right now? I think Secretary Granholm mentioned it already, but climate change has been on a lot of people's agenda for quite some time now. And and how do we make the data actionable, as you have done?
Yeah, so there's, why now? We have so much data available to us, and we really are starting to open up the door with access to that data, as well as access to the resources to be able to work with that data, from data skills to the cyber infrastructure that supports it. And so for me, that's really the reason why now. And we've seen the power of informatics and analytics with respect to social media and changing behavior. 15 years ago, people would still call people up on the phone, and now they just shoot them a Facebook message or a TikTok or a Twitter or whatever. And we see it with Uber as well, right? We would have never taken rides from strangers 20 years ago. And now this is just common practice. And so the power of collecting the right kind of data into the necessary information to make informed decisions can really change the way that we behave in society. And so to me, the reason for why now is, now that we know that we can do this, can we start applying this for living more sustainably in a more stable climate system? And can we use the wealth of data and information available to us to do this in an informed way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just want to reiterate, so tech really has, advances in tech have enabled us to gather, and make sense out of very large data sets. And that really helps us to understand what's going on with climate change and to help look at root causes as well as impact. But also tech helps us to get the message out to people and can influence people's behaviors for good or for bad. And I think that speaks to why we need a diversity of people to work in our field, so that it's the messaging and the just collection and analyzing data keeps in mind, inequity, and make sure that everybody's included. So, yeah, do you have any other?
Oh, yeah, I was just going to feed on that, there's this model in sort of information sciences. It's called the knowledge hierarchy, and you have a wealth of data. And from that, you can use, tools like machine learning to find patterns of information. And from those patterns of information, we can then analyze and synthesize. This is where AI comes in, into knowledge. And from knowledge, we make informed decisions. And where I wanted to go with why diversity is so important in that is it actually comes back to the fundamental definition of science and what a hypothesis is. And we cannot ever prove a hypothesis to be true. We can only disprove alternate explanations over and over and over and over again. And the more different alternate explanations we have that we can't, that we disprove, the more confidence we have in the knowledge that we have. And so we need diverse perspectives to be able to test from all different perspectives and experiences, whether or not what we think we know is true is truly true.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you. Well, so can you share with us, I know you have some really interesting examples of how important it is. I think for a lot of us, we understand, yes, diversity is great. In principle, we understand that if we have a greater diversity of people at the table, then we'll have a greater diversity of perspectives and ideas, and we have greater understanding, hopefully more impactful solutions that we can develop together. But I thought, when we were chatting earlier, that you had some really good examples of what happens when we don't take advantage fully of diversity of knowledge and insight in this field.
Yeah, I think you're specifically thinking about the fire example in North America. And before I say that example, I just want to say that, innovation is a change in systems, and that requires buy-in. And this is sort of a concept we call social constructivism, which means that all of us construct the reality that we live in, and we all play a part in constructing that. And so that's where having the diverse voices and the diverse perspectives weighing in on what that reality is and what that reality needs to become is so important, because otherwise we perpetuate things like systemic bias and systemic racism. And so that leads me to my example. And so we have a really good example of that in North America when we think about wildfire. North America was colonized by British settlers who come from Britain, where there's not really a lot of fire. And so for them, when they came here, they saw fire on the landscape and they feared it. Even though fire had been used for millennia by Indigenous peoples, they adopted these policies of fear that suppressed all fire. And it wasn't until the academic institutions that they were the authorities of started to say, hey, in the 50s, about 50 years later, they started to say, hey, we actually need fire on the landscape. This is really important. These ecosystems, they're not healthy. But we had already had 50 years of building our system around a policy of fear of fire. And so we're still, to this day, trying to bring in the diverse perspectives of tribal nations to say, how can we integrate fire and live sustainably with fire, rather than trying to exclude fire and suppress it and avoid having it on the landscape, which we know is not very resilient, which is why we have, billions of dollars of losses every year.
Yeah. So based on your experience and the things that you've studied, how can we encourage organizations to include, truly include underrepresented members on our teams or in our communities, to hear their voices?
Oh, it's so hard. It's really sort of something that has to be systematic, where we have to start questioning the assumptions that we're making at every stage of the game. So if we go back to that knowledge hierarchy, it's, what data are we collecting? Is that data biased? From that, we're developing machine learning algorithms. Are we developing those based on our own unconscious biases that we have? And so we actually see that with, police algorithms that are saying this person's more likely to be a criminal than this other person. There's intrinsic bias that's built into that algorithm from the start. And so to me, it really comes from a fundamental level of questioning the assumptions that we have, which is super challenging because it requires us to question the reality that we assume to be true, that, holds us in a stable state. And so I think questioning the assumptions is the most important way to do that. And by doing that, you have to invite diverse voices to the table and be willing to listen and create an inclusive environment by setting, best practices for what an inclusive environment looks like. And also making sure that there's access, even if somebody doesn't necessarily adhere to the value system that you're using for evaluating how much they can contribute. So a really good example of this is the H index in academia, right? Which is inherently biased towards men a productivity culture. And so if we're using that to say this person's more valuable of a scientist than this other person, then we're already biasing ourselves towards one demographic than other demographics. And so, and this is true with, Indigenous people that prefer oral knowledge transfer rather than written knowledge transfer. So it really requires us to fundamentally look at the assumptions that we're baking into the system that we have and start to systematically dismantle those.
Wow. Actually, I wasn't aware that the H index is biased in favor of men. That's a little disturbing because, people are invited to give talks, to organize conferences, to edit journals, and so on, based on their perceived impact in the field. And H index is one measure, to gauge that. And so if this is a systemic, bias against women who are doing research and publishing their work, we need to somehow change that. But I'm curious, how can the H index be biased? Is it because naturally people tend to want to cite works that are published by men rather than by women, or are there not enough women authors in the first place?
It's a lot of different things that go into it. And I haven't studied, I've mostly just read the papers. So, but I will just say that, I think the pandemic is a really good example where, if the H index is based on the number of citations and the impact of those citations, well, the number of citations depends on how much time you have available. And if women have to take time off to have children and are also the primary caregivers, for the most part, that means they fundamentally have less time to be publishing. The second part of this is about where they're publishing. And when you look at where they're publishing, you have to look at the review process and who's allowing people into that system. And so there are certain journals that are known to be more biased because they have an editorial board and a review process that maybe doesn't have double-blind reviews. And so what happens is people aren't being evaluated by the same standard of quality assurance, of things like that in the publication process. And so these are just some of the ways that the H index can be biased and affect whether or not we're giving voice to certain people over other people.
All right. Well, thank you for raising awareness of that. I'll have to pay closer attention moving forward. So, advancing climate resilience is a huge lift, right? And the multifaceted solutions. So we've heard goals such as net zero, carbon sequestration, and other buzzwords. Maybe can you explain some of the key goals, for example, by describing what companies mean exactly when they say they're going to be net zero by 2030?
I think that depends by company. And, it's also like sometimes we start with a goal, which is a lofty idea of what we want. And then you have to break it down into discrete objectives and things that you can work towards in an actionable plan. And so how a company does that really varies. But I think the important thing to think about is that, when we're talking about something like net zero for a government or, the country, that really requires systematic change. And so when you talk about what is systematic change, that's a change in policy. That's a change in the economic systems that we have that uphold that. So that includes like how we finance and where we place value. Value inherently comes at cost, right? That's the definition of value. The social factors, so both our individual personal values and beliefs, but also how we operate and construct ideas and values as a society or as a group. Of which there are many groups within a society, how those groups interact, as well as the technologies at play. And so it's not just about creating the single technology to get to net zero. It's about how that technology plays to the policies that are at play. How does it get funded and financed, and how does it fit into the economic systems and structures that we have so that it can be sustainable going forward? And then, how do you get people to adopt it based on their belief systems? And then, so it's a very coordinated and systematic, intentional effort to reach those goals, which can be broken down into discrete objectives.
That's great. I really like your so-called wicked framework, sort of starting with, well, wisdom is the ultimate goal to inform actions that will make a difference. But then wisdom is based on information, it's based on knowledge, and ultimately derived from data. So do you want to say a little bit more about this framework, this wicked framework?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I've mentioned the knowledge hierarchy. It's this very well established, it was actually established in the 70s in information science, where it's a pyramid, and you have data at the bottom, of which you have a little bit of information, of which you have a little bit of knowledge, of which you actually inform actions, which are wisdom. And most of information science in the last 40 years has started with thinking about the data we collect and moving up that pyramid. And most research does not ever talk about wisdom. It's like this unattainable thing. But in reality, if we actually want to systematically change the way that we do things, we have to understand the informed actions that we make today based on the policy, the economics, and the sociocultural factors, and the technology and tools available to us to determine what knowledge do we need to gain to actually be able to change all of those things. And then from the wisdom, we can then identify the knowledge or the AI that we need to support it. And from that, we can determine what information we need to provide using tools like machine learning, from which data do we have available to us. And so wicked innovation is sort of a framework or a structure for how do you systematically think about systematically changing a system.
That's wonderful. Of course, for us, all the people here are mostly working in the tech industry sector. Do you think it's ever possible to have artificial wisdom? I mean, today we are talking about artificial intelligence and leveraging that to accelerate, the collection of, derivation of information from data. How about in the future? Do you think we can?
I don't even think it's in the future. We talk about driving cars. A car has to be able to decide to change a lane. That's an action.
That's true. That's true.
Right. And so, but I think the important thing to remember is that we play a very important and intentional role in that. There's sometimes the sci-fi fantasy, Hollywood version of like machines have taken over the world. And I think, that's a very intentional and purposeful thing that we build. It doesn't just happen. The machines aren't just making decisions all on their own. And we're a very long way away from a machine being able to build its own AI, right? Like humans are very much in the loop on that. And so I think we're already seeing, sort of artificial wisdom happening. And I think that something that's really important that we remember when we bring it back to diversity is remembering the assumptions and the biases that we're baking into that process of what is considered a valued action and what are the value systems that support that. And so this is really where there's a whole field. And again, I'm not the expert on this, but there's a whole field on trustworthy AI and what that means. And how do you do that in a way that is, removing biases and systemic racism and things like that from the process.
Yeah, I fully agree that value system is really key to getting these artificially intelligent and wisdom systems.
I think a lot of us in tech, we want to just pretend like values and emotions aren't so important, but they all ultimately influence everything we do.
Yeah, absolutely. At least what humans do, and hopefully not what machines do. But, so, we've been talking about the importance of climate resilience and greater sustainability for our global society. How would you recommend? How would you recommend people who are interested to participate? To work towards a career in advancing that would advance climate resiliency and promote greater sustainability for our planet?
So I think the most important thing is to remember that a career is not something you plan, it's something you look back on. And that was just one of the most valuable pieces of advice I ever got, because it just fundamentally changed the way I thought about it. Oh, I don't have to have a plan. Okay. I can kind of look back on it. And so something somebody once told me is if it takes 10,000 hours to be an expert at something, that's 5 full-time work years. And assuming you work from age 25 to 65, that's 8 different times you get to be an expert. And so if you think about a career like this, you can pivot 7 different times, and you can cover 8 different expertise. And so you can create your own unique combination of skill set. And so I think the first and foremost is, if you really know that climate resilience is something that you want to get into, do a hard look at what do you have to offer? What are you most passionate about that you will have the energy to keep going? Because you are going to hit so many barriers that at the end of the day, the only thing that's going to keep you waking up and doing the job is that sense of fulfillment and purpose in what you do. So first and foremost, understanding what it is that drives and motivates you, and then recognizing that it's about the skill set and the unique combination of expertise that you pull together that you can then apply in any number of career trajectories. You know, you could go into politics and you can shape policy. You could go into business and you could help businesses create new financial models for how they think about climate. So I've talked with Morgan Stanley, and I've talked with other lead financial institutions who are fundamentally looking at how they build their economic systems to do it in a more sustainable way, knowing that they have a huge risk and liability if they don't think about it right now, independent of what policy does. Same with the sociocultural side. So if you're really interested in working with people, there's a lot of work to be done there, both from sort of humanitarian efforts all the way through communication and building cultures and being an influencer. And then there's the technology side, which is, you know, what this entire symposium is about. So it's, where do you want to work in that space, from hardware to software, and recognizing where you sit and where you need to work with others who have the skill sets that you don't have, so that you can fundamentally work in a systematic way as a group, in a diverse group, right, of people with diverse skills and perspectives.
Yes, absolutely. I really like that. I think, you know, with longer lifetimes, people can pivot even more than 8 times, right? We don't have to all retire at 65.
And some people start sooner than 25. I was just using an example to get people excited about, I mean, because as a Jane of all trades, the idea of picking one career for a life or one job for a life was like daunting. But knowing that I could change my mind made me feel a lot more free to pursue what I was most passionate about.
That's absolutely true. To close here, I think we have 1 minute left. I know you have some inspiring quote regarding progress. Is that, I mean, based on your own career experience, you want to share that with our audience as a closing word of advice?
Yeah, if you're anything like me, you're a type A personality, and even if you're not, I think we often think of, you know, perfection as the goal. And if we do that, sometimes it can stop us. And so I just want to invite all of you to accept and recite to yourself the mantra that it's about progress, not perfection. As long as you're making progress every day, as long as you're showing up and continuing to be dedicated through your passion and through what fulfills you, that's the goal, right? It's not about the perfect solution. And so just keep going.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Natasha, for your time and for your sharing with us your wisdom based on all of your career experience. I think this is a great start to a symposium, and I think we'll learn a lot more from all the other speakers to come. So thank you again, and best wishes to all. I wish you all continued progress in every one of your endeavors.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's been really fun, and I hope to see many of the people from this symposium do wonderful things.
Absolutely. Thanks again.
Thank you, Tsu-Jae and Natasha. That was really a wonderful fireside chat and a great launch to our events today and tomorrow. It was so inspiring to hear about your career journey, Natasha, and your observations on opportunities to use data for good, as well as cautions to investigate potential sources of bias in the data. I love the observation that a career is not something you plan, it's something you look back on. That's wonderful. This will be reassuring to students and others who regularly evaluate their career paths, trying to find the most motivation and purpose. Progress, not perfection, is another nugget that I will tuck away and use regularly. So thank you so much for your wonderful contributions and observations.